What's it like to be behind the wheel of one of these machines?
Absolutely fantastic. I mean, we're here today at Brooklands with a Bentley, so that's the B&B of motor racing in my world, and there really isn't anything better. These are probably the most exciting cars you can ever drive, and the most exciting thing you can do in your life with your clothes on. So get into a Bentley. If you ever get the chance, just ride as passenger, because the smile will take a month to wipe off your face. The story of this car is quite interesting. It's one of the original 50 cars built by the Bentley factory, supercharged. It's probably the easiest car to recognise as a Bentley. Every kid had one in their little matchbox. This one I bought about 25 years ago from a chap who'd had it about 30 years, unfortunately died, an American who had a vast collection. The unfortunate thing with vintage Bentleys is you have to remember they've actually lived out all the original owners, and the people that buy them, when they get them from us, we always say the same thing: you're renting them for your lifetime because it's going to live you out as well. And this one is one of the most exciting ones of all. It's a 4.5 litre 1929 blower Bentley, and this to the anoraks is the ultimate thing to talk about in the pub.
Could equate to things.
A value of a car like this, the only way to understand it, when it was new, it probably cost 2 very nice suburban houses in the best part of London, and today will still cost 2 very nice suburban houses in the best part of London. So the value of them is very, very expensive. Only the few could afford them then, and only a few will enjoy them now. The wonderful part about them is that when you're out in them, nobody really cares about the value. They just think, what a fantastic car. And when you arrive at that really smart hotel in the south of France, you park it in the front, and the doorman says, no, 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 just leave it there, monsieur.
Can you tell me a little bit about the Bentley Boys? What sort of characters they were?
The Bentley Boys, I can still honestly say I'm too young to have met them, but I met the guys that knew them very well. A couple of them were more outrageous than the other ones, but these are guys in this period would be between 30 and 40 years of age. They'd survived the First World War, and they were excited by the lifestyle that they had. Playboys in those days didn't read £5 magazines and go blind. They actually went out and did it. So what did they do? They drank all night. They tended to go with the ladies. And fast cars are all part of this. You didn't have to be 9 stone 3 to get in a Formula 1 car. You could be 22 stone, drive one of these things for 24 hours, and still go out and have a bloody good night afterwards.
Brilliant. Why were Bentleys so successful at Le Mans?
Le Mans is unusual. It starts in the early 20s, and Bentleys seem to be there virtually from the word go. If you build a really good road car, the probability is that it will last. And W.O. Bentley's whole philosophy on motor cars was to make them last. So to run 24 hours is not a problem. What happens, which a Bentley seems to be able to do better than almost any other car of that period, is to run 24 hours at high speed with playboys that hadn't gone blind reading magazines. So here we had young guys able and fit enough to drive these cars, and their pockets well enough fed that they can actually enjoy this thing, which was real motor racing, not what you see today.
Walter Owen, what sort of bloke was he? 'Cause he's
Interesting character. I met him a couple of times when I first joined the Bentley Drivers Club. He hadn't really understood what he'd built in those times. Obviously he'd gone through a period where he'd gone bankrupt and he'd been taken over by this one and told to do that. But here was a man that fathered British motor racing. This guy had somehow turned up at just the right time. He built a car that was incredibly strong, that his name would be remembered forever. And he once said to me, he said, in the mid-1930s these cars were worth nothing. Why weren't they thrown away? And why do you boys still drive them? I don't understand. So right the way through his life, although he accepted and respected clubs like the Bentley Drivers Club and the people that were driving them, it amazed him that we still found these things, which are such fantastic cars to drive, a joy to own.
excellent. Why do you call yourself the Drivers Club? Other people, we've made the point, call themselves owners clubs like Rolls-Royce.
We've always encouraged, or I was encouraged when I first bought my first vintage Bentley, and it was a car very similar to this, but not in this condition, and I gave probably 100th of what this car is worth today, that I was told that to be a part of the Bentley Drivers Club, I would be driving the car and not sitting down, polishing in it and looking at it. I could clean it on odd days, but I would use it. And my first Bentley was my only car that I had. So other than the girlfriends at the time got a bit upset because they had to put a coat on and a hat, and because the hood didn't work, once they got in the car, they thought, this is brilliant, Stanley, where are we going? That's never happened since that day to this. So a Bentley is for driving. Some of the other cars, they're owners' clubs. They just want to sit there and look at them. But these things are just outrageous on the road. They're as fast as any modern car. The road holding is incredible. The brakes work. The gearbox, yeah, take a few years to get used to. I'm still learning after 30 years. And listening to them crunch gears is just excellent, because I always think, but they're not going to break them. And the car just wants to be driven. How many cars can you say that about today?
What's it like to be on the track here at Brooklands?
The track here is fun. We did a movie here a few years ago, name drop, with Rowan Atkinson, and we ran on the banking, which is breaking up. These were quite exciting because they were bouncing around a bit. I do remember actually on the day we were shooting that the camera car couldn't get up as high as we could get up with the Bentleys. We've also broken some British records with these, and I now hold apparently 13 British records, some with His Royal Highness Prince Michael of Kent, and some which I rather stupidly did on my own, where the speed was over 150 miles an hour, and I'm still here to tell the tale. So I now know what it was like when those guys raced round here all those years ago. They were bloody mad.
Talking about Wolf Bonetto, what sort of guy was he? What sort of character was he?
I think he was obviously a very intelligent man, very much a sportsman. He had the money to enjoy himself. He didn't have to go to a cigarette manufacturer to go motor racing. He had the money to do it himself. In fact, by all accounts, he smoked more for England than they ever did. And he got into Bentleys. He found they suited his personality. They could give him the excitement that he wanted, and the fact that they could give him what would today be 3 world championships by winning Le Mans 3 times in 3 consecutive years in the same make of car, which is quite unusual. He was described by W.O. Bentley as probably the best driver. He was probably the only driver that never got any sleep at night, reading through between the lines, and it wasn't booze that kept him up, but obviously he wasn't short of a bit of skirt either. And this guy seemed to have epitomised of what was going on. When he decided that he'd had enough motor racing, he sponsored other people to race. And I think W.O., to describing him as probably the best driver, he was probably the one guy that you'd want to go out and have dinner with, because he must have been hilarious.
What about Walter and the Rolls-Royce takeover?
W.O. Bentley was taken over by the Henry Royce company in 1930-31. He found out about it by getting a telegram that had been delivered to somebody else. He was obviously very upset about it, and I don't think anything would ever reconcile the fact that he wasn't going to produce his own cars. His abilities were never really used by the other factory. He lost a bit of his way, and I think he lost his will to go on and produce things. But I still maintain that he is the grandfather of the British motor industry. One of the chaps that worked for him that didn't go with them was a guy, Wally Hassan, who later on developed engines for Jaguar and Coventry Climax. Unfortunately, I've said many times, he wrote a book called Climax in Coventry, which is an unfortunate title, and I have always said that if I ever write a book, it won't be Climax in bloody anything. But he was obviously one of the great leaders of the British motor industry, and we could think of a dozen names. And in fact, when you find a photograph of Brooklands taken in 1939, and by this point W.O. has finally got himself out of the Rolls-Royce contract and started to work for Lagondas, which were built just up the road from here in Staines. And I've got a wonderful picture at the garage. In fact, you saw a V12 Lagonda here today, which is the Bentley of 1938 and 39 in my opinion. If you look at the picture, you see 9 or 10 mechanics standing at the back of this car, and every one of them worked for Bentley Motors in 1930-31. So isn't that amazing? If the father led, the boys followed, and they did follow in droves, because when WO was involved, you won.
What about Barnetto pulling the plug on Bentley?
I think really that's a little bit unfair. Billy Rockall, who was the head mechanic, or one of the major mechanics, important men at Bentleys, then went on to work with Birkin building the blower cars, in fact this car, said to me that when it happened, the boss, as he was known, gave everybody 3 weeks' wages, which he didn't have to do. The recession had come and he was getting bitten as hard as anybody else, and his advisors said, you've got to pull the plug, you've got to stop doing it. On the stories that I've heard from people that lived through that period, apparently the main idea was that the company would go into receivership, he would wait 6 months or a year, probably buy it back and start all over again. But there were other plans afoot, and only the people up in Derby knew what was going on. And as far as Henry Royce was concerned, he was going to get rid of Bentley Motors with one big cheque.
What about the Rolls-Royce era itself?
I think the best said about that is interesting. No real interest in obviously keeping the name Bentley alive as a separate product, but sell it as another product alongside the Rolls-Royce. If they didn't want the rather ornate, expensive look of the Rolls-Royce radiator, put a Bentley radiator on it, and in the period of 50 years produce absolutely nothing worth talking about. But having said that, the people that are now involved with VW and with Bentley, you have to take your hat off to them, because they have taken on something much more than they've ever dreamed of taking on. This is okay to the new lads to think, oh, it's a Bentley, doesn't it look like every other Group C car at Le Mans, and are they going to do that? It's very, very difficult to create a racing team and win. And when you're bouncing off of the history of these cars, that's a very difficult act to follow. You're not expected to lose.